So in the next 1 hour, you're going to be getting to understand most of the cloud computing concepts to do with Azure. So when it comes to Azure, basically it's a cloud provider that is that is. Guess I need to mute someone. So essentially, whether you're starting up your career as a data scientist, a developer, and a data administrator, any sort of cloud role, you need to get familiar with the concepts of Azure. And in this guide, we are going to be basically looking at most of those cloud concepts and probably the services that are provided by Azure. So, like I said, this is going to be an introductory part of Azure, just to familiarize ourselves with those core concepts of Microsoft Azure. Well, if you don't know me, my name is Anton Biansi once again, your Microsoft Students Ambassador here at Makerere University and Uganda as a role, as overall. And essentially, I will be taking you through most of the concepts. So you can see in the chat, kindly to increase on the volume. Is it the same issue with the rest? Okay, just increase. Yeah, so basically my role is to get you to get started with most of the services that Microsoft offers. That could be Office 365, Microsoft Azure. Of course, Azure offers a lot of services like database storages, DevOps workflows, data scientists, or training all those machine learning models. So my role is basically to take you through all that in order to get started. If you have any technical issue, something that is a bit disturbing, I'm here for you. You can just reach out to me anytime so that I help you on your career journey. So moving along to the next slide. Some of our inclusive guidelines for holding the online meetings. You need to be respectful to others. If you have any question, please use the Q tag and ask your question within the chat. And also, you need to raise your hand if you want to ask a question. If you can't utilize the chat, you can go ahead and raise a hand. So moving along, the next slide, our agenda for today, we are going to be looking at the introduction to Azure. And most importantly, we are going to be looking at the cloud computing fundamentals. And along with that, we are going to be exploring Azure's role when it comes to cloud computing. And we are going to also be looking at the Azure services, just getting to understand most of the services that Azure offers. And we are going to be wrapping up by looking at how we can get started by maybe setting up our Azure accounts and then exploring most of those services that are provided by Azure in the Azure portal. So moving along. Yes, sir. For the introductory bit of it, like I said, we are going to be looking at the cloud computing fundamentals, basically, getting to understand those core concepts like elasticity, the agile framework of it, disaster recovery, and all that. So moving along to the next slide, when it comes to cloud computing, obviously, since you requested a study session for Azure, um, Azure is basically part of the cloud computing workflows. So essentially, when it comes to cloud computing, it basically refers to the delivery of computing services, um, of computing services, including storages, processing powers, the databases. I think I should mute someone here. Just give me a minute. I mute this one. All right. Thank you for muting yourself. Yeah. So essentially, like I said, when it comes to cloud computing, you're going to be looking at um, those services that are basically offered by Microsoft Azure. So you could be a developer, uh, an IoT engineer, a network engineer, data scientist. So Microsoft Azure offers all those services out of the box for you to get started within your company that you're working. So essentially, the cloud computing concept of it offers a scalable and flexible approach to technology. So essentially, it enables businesses and individuals to leverage the power of these resources in the cloud. And the concept would be like instead of running most of the computing workflows on the premises, that would be maybe physically. The concept of cloud computing is basically to take everything to the cloud just to be accessed, over the internet. Yeah, so moving along to the next slide, some of the benefits that cloud computing offers is one, basically, that is scalability. So when it comes to scalability, this is a concept where cloud resources are can be easily scaled up and down basing on the demand for your application. So suppose you're developing an application within your organization. So basically, the cloud computing concept of it helps you to scale down or scale up the computing resources that that you're utilizing within your workflows. So that concept would actually help you to maybe minimize the amount of resources that your application is using, or maybe probably increase on the resources that your application needs. So so an example of the scalability workflow would be like over the weekend, when it comes to users using your application, that would be a little bit slow compared to normal working days. So this scalability concept helps us to this scalability concept helps us to I need to mute someone. Okay, it's been muted. Sorry about that glitch. So like I said, the cloud computing offers that sort of scalability concept where you get to reduce on the number of resources that your application is using instead of um, having all those resources within the within the workflow that are basically not being used. So the cloud computing workflows also offers the flexibility, and what that means is basically the cloud computing workflows help you to have that sort of wide array of options. So that would be enabling users to choose a number of resources within the development lifecycle. So essentially, that would be maybe if your team is working on developing an application, so you would come up with virtual machines for development, virtual machines for building, and then testing, and maybe probably deploying. So that is the concept of flexibility. Instead of working on one virtual machine, you could actually set up several virtual machines. So that is the concept of flexibility. And then also cost efficiency as part of the benefits of cloud computing. When it comes to cost efficiency, it basically means that you're going to be paying for what you use. In other words, it's a pay as you go pricing model. So you get to pay for only those services that you're using within your development life cycle. So suppose you're setting up a storage account, and then within that storage account, you're basically setting up the compute instances or maybe the databases. So the cost efficiency basically helps you to have that sort of um, cost efficiency. And then also cloud computing offers global accessibility, meaning that if you're developing your application here in Uganda, it can actually be accessed across the world. And how is it done actually? You can set up maybe the regions of access. In other words, regions that can actually access your application over the internet. And then also one other benefits of cloud computing is basically resource management, and that actually has to do with the the scalability concept earlier on, and then also the cloud computing measures also offers the innovation speed. So like I said, if your team is developing an application, you could maybe set up virtual machines for testing. That is maybe development, testing, and then actually deployment. So you get to understand that there's some sort of innovation speed when you're using several services instead of maybe running everything from the premises. And also, there is also reliability for cloud computing. And what that means is basically, let's suppose you're developing an application, like I said earlier on, this sort of workflow is going to enable you to back up your data. So in that process, when you back up your data, you're going to increase chances of maybe data recovery. Suppose your organization has gone under data loss, that could be maybe on premise within your organization. So this sort of reliability enables you to retrieve your data that has been stored within the cloud. And also, the last benefit of cloud computing that would look at is environmental impact, right? So realize that when your organization runs most of the infrastructure on premises, that is physically, realize that um, some of the machines would actually, you know, produce some environmental impact. I don't know if that is well said, but essentially, when it comes to environmental impact, um, there's actually some smaller carbon footprint compared to when you would run everything from the premises. Yeah, so moving along to the next slide. When it comes to cloud computing as general, there's a concept called CapEx and OpEx. So what CapEx means is that instead of you but first of all, let's first look at maybe the definition of that. Capital expenditure, you might as well call it CapEx, is basically setting up the upfront investment in the in the physical infrastructure. That would be like buying servers, data centers, and then maybe networking equipment. Then the operational expenditure, you might call it as OPEX. That would be maybe mean the ongoing operational costs like utility bills, maintenance costs, staffing, all that. So what cloud computing workflow do is basically help you ignore all those upfront investments on buying servers, data centers, setting up networking equipments. So instead of you incurring all those costs, you would, in other words, host everything in the cloud. So whereby the cloud provider is going to help you set up the servers for your team, maybe for your application. The cloud provider is as well going to help you set up the networking equipment for your application. So essentially, the capital expenditure sort of workflow is ignored. And when it comes to operational expenditure, that would be maybe employing some individuals to help you manage the servers, manage the networking equipment. So you would, in other words, um, get rid of that by utilizing the one of the cloud providers. Moving on to the next slide. So when it comes to the cloud computing concept of it, we have what is called the consumption-based model. So what the consumption-based model does is basically helping you to pay for the computer resources that you're actually using, instead of having that prefixed purchasing workflow. You get the idea. And I would maybe relate this to making subscription for most of the hosting platforms, website platforms, where maybe they charge you $30 per month or even $100 per month. So the cloud providers basically help you to have that sort of consumption-based model where you only pay for the compute resources that you're using, instead of having that prefixed payment scheme. Yeah, so I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Moving along to the next slide. Yeah, so essentially we have a lot of cloud providers, as you may know. We have AWS, we have Alibaba, we have GCP, and most importantly, we have Azure. So Azure is one of those cloud providers, and essentially Azure is a service that is offered by Microsoft, and essentially that is what we are going to be looking at uh, in these study sessions. Moving along to the next slide. So essentially, when it comes to Azure as a cloud provider, it has several services, rather key features and offerings that it gives to most of the teams that are developing applications, training machine learning models, working on databases, essentially all that. So when it comes to Azure, like I said, it basically plays a pivotal role in the realm of cloud computing, and essentially it provides a suite of services that it could actually empower your organizations to build, deploy, and then manage applications within the cloud. So essentially, the key features and offerings for Azure, we could look at extensive service portfolio, and what I mean by that is Azure basically helps you to um, access a vast array of services, right? That could include computing workflows, networking, uh, storages, databases, setting up analytics workflows, uh, AI, IoT. Think of all those heavy computing workflows that would be done in a development team. So all those services, all those workflows are provided within the extensive service portfolio for Azure. And the other key feature would be hybrid capability, where Azure basically offering seamless integration with your on-premises environment. So that what that means is basically you can set up that sort of integration with your cloud services and your on-premises workflows. By on-premises, I mean those physical setups within your organization. So your organization could maybe have, I could say maybe physical servers. So Microsoft Azure offers you those hybrid capabilities where you get to connect to the cloud and then your on-premises workflows. Um, Moving along to the next key feature, that would be scalability and flexibility. So essentially, when it comes to flexibility, like I said earlier on, Azure resources can be scaled up and down quickly to accommodate those changing workloads. So suppose you set up your application within your organization. So you may realize that via the weekends, the number of users for your application may a little bit reduce, right? So this flexibility kind of scale helps you to reduce the number of resources that your application needs on weekends, right? So that would actually help you to minimize the consumption the number of resources that you're consuming, and in the long run, it is going to reduce the price tag that you're paying for, paying for all those services within the cloud. So the scalability workflow helps you to, to play around with all those scaling up and scaling down workflows. Like I said, scaling up would be basically to increase on the number of resources that your application needs. And then scaling down, that would be, reducing the number of resources that your application needs. And essentially, when it comes to scaling, I believe most of the applications run essentially during the week, and then over the weekends, the number of users a little bit tend to reduce a little bit. So that scalability and the flexibility workflow helps you to come up with all that. And moving along to the next key benefit, that would be global data centers. And what that means is basically, essentially, Azure has over 60 regions. And I'll be explaining the concept of regions in the next slide. But basically, when it comes to global data centers, these are actually distributed around the world. That could be in South Africa, we have a data center. Asia, we have a lot of data centers, and these data centers helps you to minimize the latency for your application. So in other words, if you're setting up your application and you want a specific number of users, rather a specific region to access your resources. So these global data centers will help you to, get started with all that. Yeah, just to minimize the latency on how your customers access your application. So moving along to the next key feature for Azure, that would be security and compliance. So essentially, all cloud providers offer all security and compliance workflows, but essentially, when it comes to Azure itself, you get to choose from a set of robust security features, and you get to set up encryption services for your application, just to set up that kind of workflow for specific number of users to access a particular resource. An example of this would be like in an organization that you may be working in. Suppose you have HR, should I call it human resource managers, you have developers, you have other key stakeholders within the organization. So essentially, you may not need the human resource manager to access resources that are needed by developers within the organization, right? So the security and compliance workflow within Azure helps you to set up all those robust key features in that a developer within the organization may only access the resources that he needs. That would be maybe the virtual machines, the data storages. So the human resource manager may not actually need to access those virtual machines. So those would only be accessible to the developers, and this helps organizations not to have that sort of accidental deletion of resources within the organization, because ideally the resource manager may not know how to how to use the virtual machines, right? So this sort of security and the compliance measures when it is set up within the organization, it helps us to avoid all those accidental deletion of resources. And moving along to the key feature, another key feature, when it comes to Azure, still, it offers AI and analytics capabilities. So what I mean by that is that suppose you are a data scientist, you could go ahead and use the AI workflows within Azure. That would be maybe getting started with machine learning studios, basically to get started with training those machine learning models for your application. And another key feature in AI and analytics would be maybe carrying out IoT infrastructures. Suppose you're setting up IoT devices within an organization, basically to have all those real-time analytics within integrated within your organization. So essentially, Azure provides all those analytics tools to help you, get started. That would be maybe Azure Stream Analytics for IoT devices. Yeah, and essentially, you're going to be looking at most of these offerings when it comes to other study sessions that are going to be coming along the way. Another key feature for Azure would be DevOps integrations. And essentially what that means is suppose you're having a team of developers, a team of operation engineers, and maybe other teams within that development workflow. So essentially, you might have DevOps integrations within that team, and Azure is one of those cloud providers that offers those DevOps integrations. And remember, DevOps consists of a bit of workflows like development, testing, deployment, and then probably monitoring how your application is working. So Azure essentially provides all those DevOps integrations out of the box. Yeah, it is actually going to be one of our study sessions as we move along the way. So no worries if that isn't making sense right now. Moving along to the next key feature, that is pay as you go. I explained this earlier on, and essentially that is getting to pay for only resources that you're using within your application. Suppose your application only needs getting access to databases. Let me mute someone here. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think he has been muted. Well, like I said, the pay as you go pricing model helps you to get started with paying for only resources that you're using. If one of the resources that you requested earlier on is no longer being utilized within your application, so essentially that pay as you go pricing model helps you to erase all the resources that are no longer needed and maybe probably that are no longer being utilized within your development team. So essentially that gives us a brief overview of the key features and offerings that Microsoft Azure provides out of the box. And moving along to other moving along to uh, the key uh, the key Azure services that Microsoft offers out of the box. We have the storage services, and essentially that would be setting up your databases in the cloud, um, setting up, having that kind of synchronization within the organization. So that would be basically setting up that sort of synchronization with uh, your on-premises data storages, and then having them to be synchronized with the cloud provider. So Microsoft Azure offers all those storage services out of the box, and like I said, we are going to be going through most of those services. We are also going to be talking about the networking services. I believe we have some networking gurus here, those that are interested in becoming network engineers. So we are going to be, looking at those networking services that are provided by Azure, and not forgetting, we are going to be also looking at the data services and then the compute services. So no worries if that has not made sense now, but we are going to be exploring most of those just to get started with all that. So moving along, when it comes to Azure itself, we've got a lot of compute services that are provided within Azure, and most of these services are, called on-demand computing services that are basically used for running all those cloud-based applications. And here we are going to be looking at basically the Azure virtual machines, the Azure container instances, and then the Azure app services. So when it comes to Azure virtual machines, these are basically on-demand scalable VMs. In other words, virtual machines for carrying out various operation systems, and then applications, and then also probably deployment. So an instance would be in your organization. Let's say you have developers. So these virtual machines help you to get started with um, probably on how you could build your application, test your application, and then maybe probably deploy your application. So instead of running everything locally, so that would be taken in the cloud. That would be taken up in the cloud. Um, another service or another compute services would be that would be Azure App Service. So what that basically means is having that sort of platform for building, deploying, and then scaling your web apps. And not only web apps, but you could have mobile apps, and then probably integrating APIs. And essentially, Microsoft Azure offers all those services integrated within your development workflows. So suppose you need to access your SDKs for your application. Microsoft Azure offers all those app services that you would think of if you're a Flutter developer, if you're, I could look at most of those frameworks that I use, if I may call them frameworks. Let's say Android Studio, Flutter, whatever. So this Azure App Services helps you to have those SDKs integrated within your application. So suppose you're setting up APIs for weather forecasting, APIs for authentications, all that. So Microsoft Azure offers all those out of the box. So you don't need to, code most of those things out from scratch. Just offers everything in the cloud. Another compute service that we may look at would be Azure Functions. And that what that means is basically setting up that sort of serverless compute workflow. In other words, suppose your application is running off of some piece of data that is generated by maybe an IoT device. So these Azure functions help you to set up that kind of workflow, in that if an IoT generates a particular piece of workflow, a particular event, so that is going to be an event triggered piece of scheme. So that's what Azure Functions offers out of the box. It helps you to have that sort of serverless computing. Yeah, so essentially, if this doesn't make sense, I said earlier on, we are going to be exploring some of this practically, and we are going to be running most of the demonstrations. So for now, moving along to the storage services. I think I forgot to include that slide. But essentially, when it comes to storage services, we have several storage services that are offered by Microsoft Azure. And when it comes to that, you may think of Azure File Storages, Azure Blob Storages, and we are going to be looking at most of those in the next study sessions. So moving along, we also have these cloud core concepts that you might have come across in most of your study sessions, the rest of the study sessions that you've been holding. And essentially here, when it comes to most of these, we can look at the virtual machines themselves. Like I said, when it comes to development workflows, you might have bits of virtual machines, but essentially Microsoft Azure offers these machines as infrastructure as service, and that is IAA and then S, just infrastructure as service, as you might call it that way. And essentially, this sort of service can be utilized by the development team, and maybe even the DevOps engineer, and then the operations team within the development lifecycle. We also have the container instances that would be thought of as a platform as service. I believe this is not making sense right now, but we are going to be studying more more in detail when it comes to the ongoing study sessions that are going to be carried along. So moving along to the next slide. So when it comes to the Azure Fundamentals, when it comes to Azure Fundamentals, you need to get certified. In other words, that is the point of time where you need to be certified at the core concepts of getting started with with Azure, and basically you may set up with the AZ900 certification, that is the Azure Microsoft Azure fundamental certifications. So that would actually um, inform the rest of your teams that I know how to play around with Microsoft Azure services. I know how to set up a database in Azure. I know how to set up a virtual machine. So essentially, that is what the AZ900 certification offers out of the box. It helps you to get familiar with all those services that are provided by Microsoft Azure, and essentially, when it comes to the rest of the roles that Microsoft offers, think of the DevOps engineer, think of the network engineer, think of the data scientist, any role that involves working with a cloud. So essentially, you would get started with those careers by probably taking up the fundamental certifications, and that is most importantly called the AZ900 certification exam. And it essentially covers, the basic concepts of the Azure cloud. Most of those, most of the concepts of which we've been looking at, covers all those out of the box. And so when you take up this certification, you need to get to understand those basic concepts of Azure. You need to get familiar with those core concepts for Azure administration and all that. So moving along to the next slide. Yeah, so like I said, you might be eyeing at several certifications along the way, but you need to get started with the fundamental certifications. As you can see here, we have the AZ900 certification, which is the Azure Fundamental Certification. It's just called AZ900. We have also the AI 900 for those that maybe want to get started with being AI engineers. You get to understand the world where it's going right now. That's what that's what you get. You need to get started with, and so having taken up those fundamental certifications, you may move on to the associate levels. In the associate levels, we have a bunch of certifications that you may take up. We have the AZ 104. You may as well call it AZ 104, right? So that is for the Azure administrators. And we have other bunch of certifications that you may take up as you might see here in the chat. And essentially, we are going to be looking at most of those concepts that are utilized by most of these associate roles. So moving along, if you need to go beyond the associate levels, you may think of several roles. So that could be getting started with the Azure architecture role, architecting all those infrastructures within the cloud. So that would be maybe setting up an infrastructure that will be used by your team, the development team within your organization. So Microsoft offers all the certifications out of the box. But like I said, you need to get started with the fundamental certifications. And luckily enough, if you are a student, you are entitled to these fundamental certifications for free. So that would be maybe sitting for the examination online through testing through Pearson. And I'll be sharing most of those links after the call, after this study session. But the concept is for you to get familiar with these cloud concepts before you move to the probably associate roles and maybe the expert roles. You get to understand the idea. So moving along, when it gets to the point of sitting for the exams, for the AZ900 certification exams, you can, like I said, you can as well sit for the exam online, or maybe sit for one at a testing center. Uganda actually has I think three testing center, one at Makerere, Block A, and then Block A courses Block A, and then Isbat also has a testing center. So you get to decide where you can sit for those exams and then be certified in the long run. But essentially, the syllabus for that, you get to describe the cloud concepts. You will never miss that in the certification questions. You get to describe the Azure architecture and services, services that Microsoft offers, some of the services that we've been looking at. And you get to describe Azure management and governance workflows. And essentially, for you to pass the exam, you need to have scored 70 and above. And also, it doesn't take long for you to finish the exam. It's basically 15 minutes, sorry, 45 to 65 minutes. It really depends. Yeah, so moving along to the next slide. This one here, basically, it gives all those links that you can utilize to get started with on how you can prepare for the AZ900 certification. And I'll be sharing these slides later on after the call. So like I said, we should seek the AZ900 certification. If you're a beginner in cloud computing, you can sit for the exam. If also you need to get started with Azure, yeah, you can get started. You can sit for the AZ900 certification. And most of the roles that you may think of, like I said, the cloud engineer, cloud architect, solutions architect rather, data scientist, AI engineer, any Azure role that you may think of, you basically need to get started with the AZ900 certification. And moving along to the next slide. Like I said, the AZ900 certification basically helps you to grab a better job within your organization. So you could start with maybe as an intern. So if you basically have this certification, you may show those capability that you know how the cloud infrastructure works, and you may show it off as probably you know how to set up most of those Azure services that Microsoft offers. And that would be a stepping stone for most of the roles that you may think of. So moving along to the next slide, but before that, just need to share some of the. Let me first stop sharing and then share another screen. Just a minute. Yeah, so hopefully everyone is in position to see my screen. So essentially, when it comes to Azure, I'll be sharing the links to where you can access these. But essentially, when it comes to Microsoft Azure, first things first would be to set up a subscription. By a subscription, I mean I think someone had left. Okay, by subscription, I mean basically a sort of container that is going to be housing all those resources that you're going to be using within the within the organization. And essentially, when it comes to the dashboard here, you're seeing you get to choose several resources that you can get started with. So suppose you need to get started with a virtual machine or any other service that you may think of. Um, just going to choose a random service. I want to get started with a virtual machine. You just come to the search menu and type in any service that you want. But for this case, we are going to get started with the virtual machine. So just get to select that service that you need. If it's not on the display here, if it's not on the display, you can click on the more services, and it's going to display a bunch of services that you can get started with. But essentially here, just going to start with a virtual machine. So for any service that you're creating within Azure, you basically need to, let me first click on this so that yeah, so for any service that you want to use in Azure, an example of the virtual machine. So when it comes to setting up all that, the very first thing it is going to ask you for the subscription. In other words, a subscription is basically an authorization for you to use the Azure services. And a typical example would be in an organization that you may be working in. that organization might have bits of subscriptions, right? So a subscription basically helps you to um, have some sort of authorization for your resources within the organization. And basically, an organization might have several subscriptions. That would be maybe for the case of developers. Developers um, may need to develop, may need to test, and may need to as well maybe deploy a particular piece of resource. So typically, an organization might have several subscriptions within Microsoft Azure. So when you're setting up a particular resource, like I said, you might go ahead and give it a resource group. So by a resource group, I mean that piece of container where you get to house your resources. And like I said, you might have several resources like storage accounts, virtual machines, literally everything, in Azure, what Azure provides. So you may grab all those services and put them in a particular resource group, right? Yeah. So you get to choose a particular resource group that you want. If you don't have one, you can go ahead and create one. So essentially, I'm just going to be going with an existing one, which is for demo projects. So I'm setting up this resource. I'm setting up this virtual machine resource into the resource group called demo projects, and under my subscription called Visual Studio Enterprise. And essentially, when you're to sign up for Microsoft Azure free trial, you get another subscription. They are not always the same, but you get to um, you get another name typical to what you had signed up for. So just going to move along. This is not the same as apply when it comes to other services, but I just wanted us to get familiar with um, this setup for the subscription and the resource groups. And essentially, when you're to delete the resource group, everything within that resource group gets deleted, right? It gets deleted when you just click delete a particular resource group, and essentially you may fail to recover that after being deleted. And also another concept that maybe I would look at is a particular resource may only belong to only one resource group. So if you're setting up a virtual machine, one virtual machine, that may not be put in several resource groups. It only belongs to a particular resource group, right? Yeah. So the rest of the details only apply to a particular resource that you want to utilize. But essentially, if I'm to go back to the dashboard, you could choose other resources that you want to use. So suppose I want to get started with training a machine learning model. I could set up my Azure machine learning resource group. So I could just go ahead and click create a new workspace, and that would basically take you through the same initial step that we had looked on earlier on rather. So essentially here you need to just choose a particular resource group, anything, And you realize that the rest of the details are not the same as we had looked about earlier on in the recent demo that I've just given you. But essentially here, just choose to give it a name that you want. Suppose you want to train a machine learning model for price prediction, right? So you get to give it your name that you're comfortable with, or your colleagues in the development workflows. Yeah, so essentially, I'm just going to leave you with a bit of an assignment, and just going to be posting that. And I would request you maybe if you're also working on mobile, you could as well access this application. It is available on Play Store and App Store. You can just download it and play around with all those services that I had described earlier on. And moving along that, I suppose most of you have not utilized your students' Azure credits. So I'm going to be sharing this link so that you can get started with playing around with all those Azure services within the cloud. And another thing would be to just get familiar with this sandbox. I'll be updating this for every study session that we are going to be holding. So for today, you're going to go to the Azure Fundamentals folder, and you're just going to go through these, right? I'm just going to be making this public, and I'm going to be sharing the link after the call. So the idea for you is to just to get to stay in touch with most of these concepts. Even after the study sessions, you might as well go ahead and get started with just keeping yourself familiar with these cloud concepts. So the rest of the folders are empty. So if you attempt to access most of the rest of the folders, you're not going to get anything. But for today, the Azure Fundamentals folder has everything that you might actually want to get started with in the cloud. I'm going to be updating the rest of the folders as we move along. It's just going to be an incremental process for us to get started. So I suppose you all have GitHub accounts. If you don't have, you can as well just go through these modules and get familiar with that. So with that being said, allow me just welcome a few questions. Just allow me welcome a few questions. Well, I can see a hand up. Go ahead and ask.
Yes, sir. It's me, Jonathan, and I was asking about
Yes.
the GitHub. Should we clone the repository or?
Oh yeah, you can clone it, you can fork it, you can do whatever you want. It's just for us to keep in touch with all those concepts. So just utilize it the way you want.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, but maybe I would say that you actually maybe give it some sort of support by starring it, just in case, to reach the rest of the students across the country.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Any other question? Any other question? Yeah, so I suppose most of the questions are going to be coming along the way. So don't hesitate to ask those questions. I'm just willing to help anyone, because that is my work. I'm here to help any student to get started with any Azure service. Not only Azure, but that would be Microsoft as a role, as a whole. So that would be getting started with Office 365, Xbox, anything, literally anything about Microsoft. You can just ask me about that, and I'll be willing to help. And I need to make this clear. I will not ask for any sort of a coin that I'm training you on any service. It's just completely free. So just feel free to ping me at any time if you've not gotten to understand a particular concept. Just ping me anytime so that we can organize a study session for any concept. I'll be willing to help on that. So with that out of the way, can I assume most of the questions are done? Hello. All right. So but in case you've not understood some concepts, I'm going to be uploading this recording on one of our Students Ambassador YouTube channel.